This video is brought to you by BootDev. Hello noble ones, welcome back to my channel. This is the Metatron speaking, and I've recently made two videos about Netflix's Alexander the Making of a God. First it was a reaction to the trailer, and then of course a full-on review and historical analysis of episode 1. You'll find links in the description below. Now of course today we are reviewing episode 2, and boy, I've got a lot to say about it, but before doing that I'd like to tell you, particularly if you're new to this channel, that what we are doing is that we review any sort of show, sometimes even video games, for historical accuracy, but the level of scrutiny depends on what sort of show we are reviewing. For instance, if it's a fantasy movie, yeah, even if a helmet or a shield is sort of historically implausible, it doesn't really matter because, there's magic involved, perhaps elven metals, so we will be a lot more forgiving, whereas on the other side of the spectrum, if you're reviewing a full-on documentary, then of course we expect a certain level of historical accuracy. Now when it comes to this series, it's not a full-on documentary, but it is a docudrama, so the step right underneath a documentary, we've got talking heads of professors with whom I disagree quite substantially, as you'll see. Therefore, we do expect a certain level of historical accuracy. Alright, starting right off the bat with the weapons and armor, so in general, the costume department, and I'm purposely using the word costume in this case. As I have mentioned on episode 1, there is a significant problem with the way weapons and armor are represented on the show on both sides, the Macedonian side and even more so on the Persian side. But I believe in episode 2 the situation is even more evident because of the fact that we've got actual full-on battle scenes. In general, one of the main problems is the fact that first, on the Macedonian side, even though some of the helmets are correct, like these ones for example, unfortunately the overwhelming majority of weapons and armor that are used, they are supposed to be bronze, but you can easily tell that they are some sort of soft material. It's probably leather, and it has been painted over with this kind of tarnish look, that green bluish patina that you normally get on bronze. And if you're interested in a full-on technical analysis of what bronze would have looked like in period, I refer you to this video, link in the description. And even though in the majority of cases bronze would have looked polished and lustrous in Greek armies, specifically for the Macedonian in this case, we know that they painted their helmets, they painted their armor, and therefore, rather than this homogeneous greenish tone that makes it look like they're wearing stuff from like 300 years in the past, we should have seen much more colorful representation in the army. We also come across very strange specimen of helmets that have these sort of little leather scales underneath that I've never seen and I cannot identify in any historical example. But overall, the impression that I get, we see of course leather braces everywhere, which once again we don't see in iconography. But overall, the impression that I get when I look at this specific set is that it looks like a sort of low-budget, B-level theatrical level of costumes, which, considering the fact that this is on Netflix, is surprising. But the situation gets really worse when we look at what happens on the Persian side. As usual, the Persian are represented in a very incoherent and inconsistent way. They wield scimitars and weapons that come from the future, like the medieval period. And to add insult to injury, do you remember when in episode 1 I told you that Memnon was wearing an armor that looked like it was trying to represent Masters of the Universe, specifically Spy Corps? Well, now that armor has multiplied and we see it worn by several people. Gosh, that armor. Between you and me, I think it's the same. I don't think they have multiple ones. I think they have the actor that is playing Memnon take it off and lend it to other people so that they can pretend that they have multiple, but I don't think they do. Anyways, enough about that. As we reach minute 151, something interesting happens that I think looks pretty good, so I do want to praise the show when they do something right. As the Macedonian army reaches the shore, finally, Alexander is stepping out of his ship. He's wearing his full panoply, so his entire armor, and then he plants firmly his spear in the sand. Even though it's possible that we are looking at what would be considered to be propaganda and poetic license, the sources do agree in depicting Alexander as the first to land on the beaches of Asia in full panoply. And when I say the sources, I mean both Arrian and Anabasis of Alexander. Justinian even writes that Alexander first hurls his spear from the ship onto the ground and then leaps onto the beach like a man dancing the Pyrrhic dance. So, if I was directing the show, I would have told him, no, we are doing totally this. He's gonna throw the spear and then jump from the ship. But in general, it was a nice representation, and it is consistent with the sources. Okay, as we move forward to minute 7:29 is when, before, the whole battle and facing the Persian army, Alexander, Hephaestion, and Ptolemy decided to go to the Temple of Athena because this was believed to be the sepulchre of the hero Achilles. We know that Alexander felt a connection with the hero Achilles, and that's absolutely correct. correct from a historical standpoint, and as they are there, lingering inside the temple, the weapons dating back to the Trojan War are given to him. It is highly improbable that these are actually weapons dated to the Trojan War, but I'll get back to this point later. Now, Alexander, whether you like him or you hate him, one thing we cannot say is that he didn't have the correct skill set for his time, and definitely investing in the right skills that can help you find your career path is paramount in any age, which is why I'd like to take a moment of your time to tell you about the sponsor that made this video possible, BootDev. In our day and age, as our society continues to become more and more competitive, learning a skill that is applicable and can lead you to a full-on career is indeed paramount. And a career path that you should totally look into is back-end development. BootDev is a platform that uses tactics learned from modern-day gaming design, and their mission is to teach you how to program. As you use their platform, you will learn back-end web development in several programming languages, including Python and Go. And what's really cool about their teaching methodology is that they're going to forge your programming career by teaching you how to code. I've been checking out their Python course, and as a former school teacher, this is an excellent format because they make it fun. As I was trying it out, I just kept going and I didn't even notice because they literally got rid of the boring aspect with their gaming-like approach to learning. In the sense that you can earn experience, level up, and you can even compete with other people if that's your thing. And the way the platform is designed is to get you writing a ton of code, because at the end of the day, getting your hands on the keyboard and shipping projects is the only way to really learn. Similarly to being a content creator on YouTube, becoming a programmer has several advantages. For example, the fact that oftentimes you get to work from home. Not to mention the programmers have an amazing earning potential. According to Stack Overflow, the median salary for backend developers in the US in 2023 was $100,000. So click the link in the description below and use my code Metatron to get a 25% off your first payment at BootDev. That's 25% off your first month or your first year, depending on the subscription you choose. And many thanks to BootDev for sponsoring my channel and making this video possible. On minute 1554, we finally get a glance at the beautiful helmet worn by Memnon, and of course, I mean, what were you expecting, considering the rest of the set? Goodness gracious. From a cinematic perspective, the way they have rendered the Battle of Granicus is actually really nice to see, but there are a few things that stand out. For example, the fact that as they charge with cavalry, they are holding the spears in a way that makes it more reminiscent to a medieval shock cavalry charge tactic, rather than the way cavalry was used in the classical period. And talking about cavalry, this is one of the main points of disagreement that I have, and also my whole team have, with one of the talking heads or historians on the show. The importance of cavalry in the Alexander's Macedonian army. Between minute 1545 and 1551, we see that the historian says, the Macedonian cavalry is really the most important part of their military machine. This is nuts. We know that infantry has always been the most important part of the Macedonian war machine. The Macedonians under Philip II had succeeded in imposing themselves on most of Greece as a hegemonic force, both because of their astute political choices, but also because they had completely revolutionized the concept of infantry, developing and perfecting some elements that had already been partly discussed and implemented by the Athenian generals and Theban generals. Keep in mind, for example, that the Macedonian phalanx of this time was not using dori anymore as a main spear, but they were using full-on pikes called sarissa, which reached over 5 meters in length. Thus armed, the Macedonian infantryman does not charge against the enemy, but advances towards them at marching pace, which we do not see on the show, where instead they run like maniacs. He's using the anvil and hammer tactic, which requires synergy between two corps, infantry and cavalry, as cavalry harasses the enemy, leading them against a wall of pikes. And this sort of tactic, which used both infantry and cavalry, was very important specifically against the Persian armies. So while it's true that Alexander won many of his battles because he was able to make good use of his cavalry, leading it in person and managing to hold his own against the Persian cavalry, without his phalanx, no victory. Not to mention that the emphasis placed by, once again, the talking heads on the fact that Memnon must have been shocked by Alexander's initial cavalry charge makes no sense. In reality, the first Macedonian assault, led by officers Amintas and Socrates, who led the vanguards of the right wing, was met with a tremendous throwing of javelins by the Persians, and then, as Arrian writes, the Macedonians, being far inferior in numbers, suffered severely at the first onset because they were obliged to defend themselves in the river, where their footing was unsteady, and when they were below the level of their assailants, whereas the Persians were fighting from the top of the bank, which gave them an advantage, especially as the best of the Persian horses had been posted there. And the Macedonians who first came into conflict with the Persians, though they showed great valor, were cut down, except those who retreated to Alexander, who was now approaching. So no, they weren't shocked. They resisted, and quite well. Not to mention, defining Alexander's tactics in this specific situation as bizarre is something we disagree with. I mean, what he did is simply fall on the Persian left wing with his cavalry. Standard. Last but not least, and then we move to the next point, is the fact that the docuseries also seems to suggest that the victory of Alexander was due to the greatest mobility of his army and cavalry, but that's not what the sources tell us. The sources tell us specifically that the victory was achieved due to the fact that Macedonian horsemen are equipped with the xyston, a long thrusting spear, while the Persian horsemen only had javelins. When I say victory, I mean specifically the confrontation between the opposing cavalries. Let's now talk about prisoners. So as Alexander historically moves both his phalanx and has the cavalry fall upon his enemies, a lot of the soldiers, particularly Greek mercenaries, surrender. The scene that unfolds is then the execution of the Greek mercenaries, because I mean, how dare you fight Greek versus Greek, and so he has them all slaughtered. But what does history actually tell us? Arrianus tells us that yes, Alexander was very harsh towards these prisoners, but he didn't kill them. We read, as many of them as he took prisoners he bound, and sent them away to Macedonia to till the soil, because though they were Greeks, they were fighting against Greece on behalf of the foreigners in opposition to the decrees which the Greeks had made in their federal council. He's of course referring to the League of Corinth in 336, which stipulated that Greeks shouldn't have attacked other Greeks. So does it make sense that Alexander is disgusted by these Greeks fighting other Greeks? Well, remember the Greek city-states always fought against each other, so that wasn't like something completely uncommon, regardless of what they tried to do to try and unify and avoid this from happening through both propaganda and legal action. With that being said, no, he didn't have them all executed like we see, he sent them back home. I do want to commend them from one specific scene during this battle, however, and it's when Alexander breaks one of his spears and has another one given to him. And as he does that, a Persian soldier hits him in the back of the helmet. All of this is historically proven, and it was mentioned in 3 sources: Arrian, Diodorus, and Plutarch. So well done on that one. During the documentary, they also tell us that during this battle, he was indeed wearing the armor of Achilles. Do we have any historical evidence of this? Well, whether that be considered Achilles' armor or not is somewhat speculative, even from his own men, but we do know that the fact that he, as we said, visited the Temple of Athena, which was near Achilles' tomb, is in fact mentioned in the sources, and this is what we can read from the period. Diodorus writes, taking the finest of the panoplies deposited in the temple, he put it on and used it in his first battle. As we continue reading, he took 3 blows on the shield which he had brought from the temple of Athena. Arrian also mentions something interesting about Alexander's armor. Let's read it. Alexander was unmistakable from the splendor of his equipment. Did you hear that, Netflix? Splendor! We do see Alexander carrying these sort of holy relics, if you will, that are attributed to both the War of Troy and possibly Achilles. Of course, we shouldn't believe these to be necessarily period when it comes to the Battle of Troy, but it's possible that if he did find anything that was considered to have some sort of mythical aura to them, which he surely did, then yes, it's very plausible that he would carry them in battle. Here is another problem that I have with one of the talking heads, again nothing personal. Between minute 28:55 and minute 29:09 we are told about Memnon's death, and what the professor tells us is that Memnon died a sad and inglorious death right after the siege of Halicarnassus. This really puzzles me. I don't understand if it's a problem that maybe they cut too much out of what he was saying and then he ended up saying this, because first of all, Memnon did not die after the siege of Halicarnassus. In fact, it will continue to be a huge problem for Alexander, and even managing to move some of the focus of the battles from full-on field battles to somewhat of a naval capacity. Regardless, if we read the sources, you'll see that it does not sound like he's having a sad and inglorious death at all. Let's read. Diodorus tells us, Darius sent money to Memnon and appointed him commanding general of the whole war. He gathered a force of mercenaries, manned 300 ships, and pursued conflicts vigorously. He secured Chios, and then coasting along the Lesbos, easily mastered Antissa and Methymna, and Pyrrha and Eresus. News of the general's activity spread like wildfire, and most of the Cyclades sent missions to him. A word came to Greece that Memnon was about to sail to Euboea with his fleet. The cities of that island became alarmed, while those Greeks who were friendly to Persia, notably Sparta, began to have high hopes of a change in the political situation. So, even though it's true that Memnon's successes are indeed cut short by a sudden death, he however had managed to seriously put Alexander's in crisis with a plan that, as Diodorus points out, was aimed at, in his word, shifting the war from Asia to Europe, and a plan that was having great results. As we reach minute 32:24, we're introduced to the legend of the chariot of Gordius and the fact that it had a knot that couldn't be untied, and the legend is absolutely true and mentioned in the sources. However, we have a very weird way of depicting this, because first of all, we see that in the TV series, this chariot is somewhat it appears to be abandoned in the middle of the street, whereas we know that it was kept inside the temple of Zeus. But regardless of that, is it true that Alexander cut the knot with a sword? Well, even though this is indeed mentioned in some sources, and when I say some sources, I'm specifically meaning Justinian and Curtius Rufus, it is also important to underline that there are two more authors, Plutarch and Arrian, who give us a slightly different version. We read, he undid it very easily by simply taking out the so-called hesto, or pin, of the wagon pole by which the yoke fastening was held together, and then drawing away the yoke. So which one is it? Did he cut it, like they went with the show, or did he just remove the pin? Well, personally, we believe as a team that the latter is more reliable, simply because, even though it comes to us through Plutarch, is in fact coming from a specific description from Aristobulus, who was a traveler who was there with Alexander and was therefore an eyewitness. Now, I would imagine that they are aware of this. I mean, these are professors we're talking about, so it's not that I'm disagreeing with the fact that they chose the cutting instead, it's just that I think it would be nice to mention both, so that the viewer could be instructed in the idea that there are two different versions, and as I say, I still think that the one of removing the pin is more believable. Anyways, all in all, this is what I wanted to say and what I have to say about episode 2. Of course, if you like these sort of videos and you want me to continue this evaluation and perhaps do a, of course, historical analysis of episode 3 and perhaps do the entire series, please let me know in the comments below. Let me know if you are enjoying this series regardless of the historical inaccuracies. Personally, I've got to say I'm not a huge fan. I don't think this series has been done as well as it could have been, but it still is somewhat entertaining to watch, even though I have to, of course, stop it every 3 seconds to take notes, but that's me, that's my life, I suppose. As always, don't forget to subscribe to this channel if you enjoy this sort of content and become a noble one. Subscribe to my channel for more content from the Metatron. Don't forget to click the notification bell, and thank you so much for watching and for your time. And remember, the Metatron has spread his wings. Goodbye.